Thanks very much, Jashika. So diversity is a very large topic. And from my side, even though it feels like we've been focusing on it for some time now, we're still barely even scratching the surface of what it actually entails. So I've been lucky enough to have the privilege of having several conversations regarding women in engineering, because obviously that is primarily where my own experience sits. I found when I started studying, it was, while obviously considered completely appropriate for women to study engineering at that stage, it still wasn't a very popular option. So we only had maybe 8, 9 women in our class. And when I started work, for the most part, I found that I was the first woman engineer that most of the contractors at least had encountered. So it was a bit of a struggle initially to be taken seriously and considered first and foremost for engineering ability rather than just being downplayed as women. So we're now close to almost 20 years on, and the stats have improved slightly. If you say you're a woman engineer, you're not quite as likely to get an eyebrow raised at you, and most contractors have at least come to terms with the fact that such things exist now as women engineers. So that is at least a serious step in the right direction. But unfortunately, we do still see bias in the workplace. I find a lot of this now typically is more unconscious rather than intentional bias. And with the best will in the world, we do all have biases. And these affect the way that we talk and we interact. So from a manager's and a senior individual's perspective, we actually have a lot of power in this regard, because the rest of our teams will either consciously or subconsciously follow the lead in the approach that we take. So as Masinyana said, that there are a lot of unconscious biases. If you have a woman in your team of engineers and you're asking her to do the minutes every time, you are showing bias. You might be saying it's actually a compliment because women are better at multitasking. I've heard that sentence a few times. But I think if that is your approach, then you possibly need to fairly carefully examine your own bias and your assumptions. If you are complimenting your staff and you're saying things like, oh, he's a good engineer and she's a lovely girl, that's a very strong indication of the fact that there are unconscious biases coming out there. And unfortunately, if you are a manager, your team members take their lead from you. So this propagates the bias as opposed to actually trying to constrain it. Now, these are direct examples that I've seen or had in the past. I'm talking mostly from the side of women here, but really it's applicable to all forms of diversity. So to my mind, how do you become aware of it? So I find having the conversation helps. Go to the members of your team, ask them openly and frankly, say, what am I doing which is indicative of bias? Is there anything that I am doing that's making you uncomfortable or feel less valued? There are very few individuals who are going to turn around and turn down an opportunity to be able to give guidance on that regard. And it's the very nature of unconscious biases means it's very difficult for us to spot our own biases. So it's quite a lot easier to become aware of other people's biases. If you're having these conversations, though, it's very important to listen to what's actually being said. Our instinctive reaction when we see people as criticizing us is to get defensive and to try and argue with it or ignore it or write it off as not being relevant to us or they've misunderstood us. The fact that they are saying it means it is their opinion. It might not be true, but it is at least their opinion. So you have to listen, take it on board, and assess your opinion of yourself with that extra information that you've had from these conversations. Now, obviously, we can talk forever on diversity and biases and how they play in the workplace. But there's something from our side that I consider it's important to ask the question, are diverse teams truly necessary? Why does it matter if my team is diverse or not? Now, I believe that it is frankly absolutely essential. And in particular, because of the fact that we are engineers. As engineers, we are primarily problem solvers. That's how we see ourselves to a large extent. So one of the best ways to solve problems is to take a step back, look at that problem from a holistic perspective, and try and get as good a brief or as good a definition of the problem as we humanly can. Now, the more diverse the team, which is stepping back and looking at this problem, the better the chances that you're going to have a more holistic or solid understanding of that problem, a more complete understanding of that problem. And the more complete your understanding of the problem is, the better the solution will be and the most appropriate the solution will be to the problem. So diverse teams are absolutely essential, purely in being able to just look at things from a different perspective. I mean, there are many, many benefits, but just the sheer factor that they take you out of your nice, comfortable bubble and let you see things through a different light means that they're absolutely essential. So yes, that's pretty much where I am and where I stand. So thank you for having me to join as the panel today.